Hello everybody, it's Sarah, and I know I've been uploading regularly, but actually all the past videos from the past few weeks, since the beginning of January basically, have been pre-filmed in the very first week and the very first days of January. So I haven't sat down in front of a camera in the past 2 weeks. And for some reason that already feels really weird and like I have unlearned how to sit in front of the camera and talk to you. So yeah, I don't know what's up with that. But today we're going to talk about these books right here, which are the books that I have read so far in January, which looks like quite a stack. However, a lot of these books are actually rereads, so they were pretty fast reads. And yeah, let's talk about that. Also, there's gonna be some books in this stack, or at least one book so far in this stack, that I won't be talking about. It's this book that I have turned around because I started a secret TBR and I'm probably gonna be done with that at the end of February. So you will know what's up with that then, although I'm sure some of you might already be able to guess what this secret TBR is about, since, you know, it's quite a typical booktube video. But anyway, before we get into these books, let's talk about the books I'm currently reading. First, I started Iona today by Alison Goodman. This is a YA high fantasy, and it's the book that I pulled from my series TBR jar. I have so far only read one chapter. I'm 30 pages into it. No thoughts yet. A book I'm a bit further into is Brisingr by Christopher Paolini, which is the third book in the Inheritance cycle. This was one of the books that I pulled from my regular TBR jar, so my physical TBR jar, and I have about 200 pages left of this book. I cannot wait to be done with this. I cannot wait to be done with the series. I cannot tell you how much I just do not care anymore about any of the characters, sadly, but I feel like I owe it to 12-year-old me to see this series through to the end, so that's what I'm gonna do. Or, like, for now, at least the third book in the series. Then I also started The Betrayals by Bridget Collins. This was actually an accidental buy, because for some reason I bought this instead of The Midnight Bargain, which was the book that I pulled from my, you know, random books I wanna read TBR jar. But I somehow hadn't realized that The Midnight Bargain isn't even out yet. And both The Midnight Bargain as well as this have a clock on the cover. And so when I saw this at the bookstore, I for some reason thought this was The Midnight Bargain, but it's not. But it's a pretty cover. It's historical fiction. I have no clue what's going on. I'm like 3 chapters into it. I'm 50 pages into it. And yeah, we'll see how much I'll enjoy it. So this was an accidental read, kind of. But I mean, look at this cover. Isn't this cover absolutely gorgeous? Then I am halfway through The Sword of Cairn by M.L. Wang. This is the buddy read for my book club of Queens, Witches and Valkyries, where we read one adult high fantasy book written by a woman per month. And I will leave the book club link down below and up there. Also, yesterday I uploaded the poll for February read. The picks are, I think, The Ruin of Kings, The Empress of Salt and Fortune, Hall of Smoke, and then the last one is The Shattered Wings. So yeah, if you're interested in joining in the buddy read, as I said, links are down in the description box and you will find the poll on Twitter. So yeah, I'm currently reading this. I'm really enjoying it, although I'm enjoying it so much that I completely forgot that I wanted to vlog reading this book. So yeah, but you might see some of my reactions anyway, because this in fact is also part of my secret TBR. Although I guess this book is not that secret because I already have it as a part of the buddy read. So you already know that I'm gonna read it anyway, or that I'm reading it anyway. But yeah, so that's that. Then, by the way, I also have another currently reading that's part of my secret TBR, but obviously I won't share that book. And then the last currently reading book, because I'm reading a lot of books right now at the same time, is Warlord by Jennifer Fallon, which is the last book in the Hydron Chronicles. So I'm doing a reread of this trilogy, which is one of my all-time favorite high fantasy series. And I'm really enjoying my reread. While there are some aspects that don't really hold up to, like, you know, scrutiny now that I'm older, now that I'm not 12 anymore, now that I have read more adult high fantasy. Overall, I still think this is just a really enjoyable series, but I will have a review up of this anyway, even though that's probably gonna be up at the beginning of February and not still in January, because I probably won't finish this in January. But yeah, now let's move on to the books that I actually finished. So as I showed you earlier, I have so far finished 7 books in the month of January. However, I will only talk to you about 6 of them because I won't talk about my secret TBR. First, let's talk about the rereads. The first of the rereads I have was Daughter of the Forest by Juliet Marillet. This is the first book in the Seven Watchers series, which is a kind of generational series. So each book follows a different member of the same family or a different generation of the same family. And I buddy read this with Aoife from Words of Clover. I will leave her link down below. And I really enjoyed the buddy read. This was a reread for me. As I said, I have previously read this book I think 4 or 5 times already. However, I haven't picked this book up in probably 6 or 7 years. And I forgot a lot of what happened exactly. I could remember some scenes, I could remember the general, you know, story arc, but there also was a lot of stuff that I couldn't remember, and I just once again really enjoyed it. I just love Sorcha as a character. I love all of her brothers. By the way, this specific book is a retelling of The Six Swans, and so we follow Sorcha, who has 6 older brothers, not 7. She's the 7th child. And one day her father remarries and her brothers are turned into swans because the new wife turns out to be a sorceress. And to turn her brothers back, Sorcha has to live in complete silence. She's not allowed to utter a single sound for as long as it takes her to knit shirts for each of her brothers. But these shirts are made out of this plant that's kind of like nettles, and so it hurts her hands a lot. And oh my god, the story is so heartbreaking. There are a lot of really hard scenes in this story, so also trigger warnings for rape and sexual assault, also of course self-harm, not in the usual sense of cutting yourself or anything, but I still would think that maybe Sorcha knitting those shirts, hurting herself by knitting those shirts, might be along the lines of self-harm for some people. So yeah, there definitely are some trigger warnings for this book that I would check out before picking this up. But overall, I love this book so much. It is just exactly what I want from a retelling. It is very tropey in parts, but for me personally, I don't mind that in retellings because fairy tales, of course, can be very tropey. They are often the very start of tropes. And so I love that if retellings sometimes lean into tropes extra hard, and that definitely happens in this book. So yeah, I can highly recommend everyone go and pick this up. Then next, since I'm already at the 3rd book in the Hydrum Chronicles, you probably guessed it that I finished the 2nd book, which is Warrior already. And I don't enjoy the 2nd book as much as I enjoy the 1st book. The 1st book I think is definitely my favorite in the series, but still I do also love the 2nd book a lot. Although, you know, in the 2nd book there's kind of a plague storyline, so if you're kind of iffy about that right now, then maybe don't pick up the series right at this moment. But yeah, overall, I just love the characters, and as I said, I'm gonna have a whole review up once I'm done with the reread, so I won't linger too much on this book right now. Also, maybe before I move on to the next book, maybe I should at least tell you what this is about, even if I won't tell you more of my thoughts right now. This series is a political high fantasy series, and in the first series we follow Marla Wolfblade, who is the younger sister of the High Prince of Hydria. And since it's very likely that the High Prince won't ever get an heir, she's kind of, you know, the prime pawn within the political games and machinations of Hydria. And when she finds it out, she decides that she's gonna take some power to herself, even if in this country as a woman she doesn't have that much power. And she's gonna make sure that if she ever gets an heir to the throne, that heir actually makes it to the throne. And she's gonna make sure that, you know, she's gonna keep the throne for her brother, because there's also, of course, some intrigues going on that want to take the throne away from her brother and from her family. And so while in the first book we mostly just follow Mala, from the second book onwards we also follow a lot of the other members of the Wolfblade family. And yeah, so that's what this series is about. Then I read Elantris for the third time. This is one of Brandon Sanderson's standalone novels within the Cosmere. I think I prefer it a little bit over Warbreaker, but it's hard to say. Because, you know, I like the characters in Warbreaker more, but I like the story in this one more. By the way, when I say this is a standalone, I mean this is a standalone for now, but Elantris is, like, the sequel is so far down the line. It's not even worth mentioning, because first we're gonna finish the Stormlight first arc, then Mistborn Era 2, Warbreaker is also gonna get a sequel before Elantris, so it's probably gonna be like 7 years or something, who knows. But anyway, this series is set around Elantris. And Elantris used to be a city of gods. The people living in Elantris were like kind of magical and mystical and so on. However, one day, 10 years ago, they fell. And no one knows what happened. They just like, you know, something happened to them and now everything's fucked up. Now the story we're following is set 10 years after the fall of Elantris. And we follow 3 characters. One is a prince who kind of is the prince of the city next to Elantris, and he turns into an Elantrian, but into a fallen type Elantrian. The second character is Serene, who is a princess from a faraway land coming to marry said prince. And the third one is a priest who tries to, you know, convince the people of the city next to Elantris to follow his ways and his religion. And yeah, I really enjoyed my reread of Elantris. I read this because of a read-along that's currently going on. I think it's called the Cosmic Crab-along. I believe the links that I will find down below, like with all the info and such. And yeah, it's going on for the entirety of the year, and all the books within the Cosmere are gonna be read by the end of the year. And of course, I have said for a long time, and I've also said it in my 2021 reading goals, that I want to reread the entirety of the Cosmere back to back, see if maybe that way I can get a few more of the connections. And so I thought the read-along is a good motivation. So yeah, that's on that. And now on to the 3 books that I read that were first-time reads for me. The first of those is Knife of Dreams by Robert Jordan, which is the 11th book in the Wheel of Time series. And finally something is happening again. Although I gotta be honest that the last few books I was so bored that I started skim reading so much that like I'm kind of really confused with the amount of characters right now, especially the Aes Sedai and the Senchan, because like who belongs to which faction in the White Tower now, or of the Aes Sedai now, who's Black Archer, who's not Black Archer, like I'm a little bit confused. I was a little bit confused, I'm not gonna lie, during this book, but overall I'm just happy that something is happening again. Like, I feel like the plot is finally moving forward again, and I wanted to read Knife of Dreams as well this month. However, that won't be happening because currently it seems like The Gathering Shadow, which is book 12, is sold out in this edition, like every single place. I looked at the website of my bookstore, I looked at Amazon, I looked at Book Depository, I looked at Blackwell's, and they don't have this edition of the 12th book anywhere. And I'm not usually a stickler for editions, however, I have all the editions. I've also already bought book 13 and book 14 in this edition. I now have all the books except for that one in this edition, and if the series is 15 books long, I won't buy a single book in a different edition. I'm sorry, that just isn't gonna happen. So I won't continue on with the series until I can get my hands on book 12 in this edition. Then I read Alice's Adventures in Wonderland by Lewis Carroll. This was also one of the books I pulled from my physical TBR jar, and yeah, it's just a fun classic. I mean, I think everyone knows what this book is about, but yeah, it's just a fun classic and it's easy to read, and I think it's a good place if you want to get into classics. but I cannot say that I enjoyed it overly much, but I think that's probably not down to the writing style or the storytelling itself, but I think that's more because this very much is a very absurd story. And I have talked about that in multiple videos already, especially in connection to fantasy and Terry Pratchett. I'm not a fan of absurd stories. So yeah, I enjoyed this, but like, it's not gonna be a classic that I'm ever gonna reread probably. And lastly, ending with the book that I probably enjoyed the least so far this month is The Card Secret by Jostein Gaarder. Jostein Gaarder is a Norwegian author. I read this in German, but it was originally written in Norwegian, obviously. And he is the author of one of my favorite childhood books, which is Sophie's World. And this has kind of a similar concept in that you kind of have these characters that philosophize a lot. And you're basically following a young son who with his father is on his way to Athens to find his mother who ran away when he was still little. And on the way there, he kind of finds this little book and there's a story written in the book. And that story then kind of ties in with his own life story and so on. And yeah, I mean, it was okay to read, but I wasn't overly impressed, gotta be honest. Also, I really wasn't impressed by the fact this was written at the end of the 90s, okay? But there was a very casual use of the N-word, and like not even in the way where it was like a racist character that talked about a black person or anything like that, but in a way, and I don't know if it was just an issue of the translation and if that is the case in the original text, but there was the scene where the characters had to either find words that are other words when you read them backwards, which in German is the case for the German N-word. If you read it backwards, it's the German word for rain. And then they also made a whole sentence with that. So a sentence that's exactly the same if you read it forwards or backwards. And yeah, the N-word was within that sentence as well. And that was just a really strange experience to read that, especially because, as I said, this book isn't that old considering. And sure, around the year 2000, late 90s, early 2000s, we maybe weren't as PC or whatever you want to call it as we are now. But I'm still pretty sure casually using the N-word wasn't a thing then, at least for non-racist and decent people. So yeah, that just made me really uncomfortable. And yeah, that was it so far. All the books that I've read in January and that I'm still currently reading. And so yeah, if you enjoyed this video, maybe think about giving me a thumbs up and also maybe subscribing. Tell me in the comments down below if you have read any of the books that I was talking about just now and what your thoughts are on them. All the links to my social media are in the description box down below, so go and check those out. As I said, all the links to my book club are also in the description box down below, so go and check those out as well. And I hope I'll see you soon. Bye!